Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at opening day of the 2037 season. The Buffalo Wings are trying to defend our 2036 World Series championship. And unfortunately, we lost 5-3 on opening day to Montreal in a game that we played out at the end of our last episode. We'll jump deep into the season in this episode. But taking a look at the forward schedule here, our former pitcher Jorge Carrillo will be facing tomorrow. He signed as a free agent with the Expos this offseason, 6 years, $82.2 million. So the loss of Carrillo takes out a pretty valuable arm from our rotation. You can see he was 52-14 over the last 3 years in Buffalo, was an international amateur free agent that we signed many years ago who ended up developing into a very good player for our team. And interestingly, a few days later, we'll be facing another long-time Buffalo Wing, Andrew Painter, who signed with the Pittsburgh Pirates as a free agent before last season, was 3-5. Actually, I guess he signed with the Mets. Did I already forget about that? Yeah, he signed with the Mets last season, and then he was traded to the Pirates, and now he's, I believe, in the second year. I believe that was a 2-year contract. Ooh, and it looks like the Mets retained every penny of that contract, so not a bad deal for the Pirates. But Painter last year was a combined 4-11 between the Mets and the Pirates, started 18 games. Certainly doesn't have the profile of a top-of-the-line starter at this point in his career, 33, almost 34 years old. And we'll be facing him on his 34th birthday, so a couple of interesting matchups this coming week against Carrillo and Painter. But should note that with the departure of Painter a year ago and the departure of Carrillo this past offseason, with Carrillo in particular, the reason for doing that was to open up enough money to sign our ace to an extension. And we've been checking in on what Alexis Baras, who will be pitching tomorrow, is looking for. And in previous episodes through the offseason, he was looking for 28, 29 million over 7 years. More recently, he was looking in the low 30s over 9 years. But when we're checking in now on opening day, he says he's only looking for 3 years and 23.2 million. So seems like he's a little nervous about playing the final arbitration year without knowing what is ahead of him as far as some guaranteed money. So I think this is our opportunity to jump in and see if we can lock Barajas up at a very attractive number. The dollar amount doesn't scare me one bit. In a perfect world, I'd like the deal to be for more years, and I'd potentially like some team options instead of player options. That said, the number he's looking for is so attractive that I think I'd really like to get this done, even if it only ends up giving us certainty that he'll be with us for the next 3 or 4 years rather than maybe 5, 6, 7 years, which would be a bit more interesting to me. So as I mentioned, Barajas was looking for 3 years and an average of 23.2 million. We are offering him 6 years at an average of 22.5 million, so pretty close on the money. A lot more years and a team option in the 6th season rather than a player option in the 3rd season. He was also looking for a bonus, pretty sizable bonus of 7 figures if he was able to pitch 160 innings, which we took out. We did bump up his Cy Young Award bonus a little bit. I don't think he'll go for this, but this would certainly be a pretty palatable option for the Buffalo Wings if it works. It's a slightly front-loaded contract, which helps a tiny bit with some of the longer deals that we've signed players to in recent years that aren't front-loaded. Only a little bit of deleveraging, so to speak, in what we're spending, but better than nothing. I can't imagine he's going to go for this after he was looking for over 30 million in 9 years just a couple of months ago. But this isn't out of the realm of what he asked for. I think it's just a matter of the years and the option situation. Looks like we have to make that buyout just slightly higher. He's willing to think about it. I think this would be a really good contract for us if we're able to get him locked up for 6 years at an average of $22.5 million a year, and even have an opt out of that 6th season if we want. So the patience, I think, with Baras and not making him a big offer right away may have worked out in our favor. We will submit the offer to Alexis and see if he goes for that 6-year, $135 million deal to give him a little bit of insurance against a potential injury this year. He is a pretty healthy pitcher with Iron Man injury proneness. That said, starting a season without any guaranteed money after this year is probably a daunting task. So might be able to get a little bit of a bargain by guaranteeing him $135 million. And hard to imagine that guaranteeing someone $135 million as a bargain, but that is the business that we are in. And kind of a sloppy opening week of the season here. As it turned out, the teams ended up changing who they were pitching. So although we won the second game against Montreal and the first game against Pittsburgh, in neither situation did we go against our former pitchers. They ended up starting Montreal Dylan Scott rather than Jorge Carrillo, and Estrada got the win there. Against the Mets, Baras was fine, but the bullpen ended up blowing things for him. Lost 3-0 to the Mets when the youngster Mendoza made his major league debut. And then finally we won today against Pittsburgh, but as I mentioned, Painter did not start the game. Ochoa was brutal for us, but we ended up coming back as our bullpen allowed no runs over the final 7 innings of action. Unfortunately, the left-handed pitcher, Eddie Mosley, who we knew was wrecked physically when we picked him up, out with elbow tendonitis for 7 weeks. So that will give us an opportunity to go down to AAA Albany and bring up someone to hopefully help our pitching staff. And fortunately for us, Darnell Polite, who we had picked up in waivers and then subsequently waived when we couldn't find a perfect spot for him on the 26-man roster, had made it back through waivers, and we were able to put him onto the major league roster to, at least for the time being, take the spot of Mr. Mosley at the major league level. Does put us in a situation where we've only got 2 left-handers out of the bullpen and just 1 left-hander in the rotation. So don't know if that's the way we ultimately want this pitching staff to look by the time we get to the playoffs. But for the time being, it is certainly an acceptable alternative, and we'll get to see what Polite can do at the major league level with our defense behind him and our excellent defensive catchers supporting his efforts on the mound. And the optimism about Baras and the contract takes a little bit of a hit. Came back and said that he wants a no-trade clause. And he's also looking for a lot more years, but somewhat less money annually. So I think we can probably still work something out here. Seems like he is pretty anxious to get a contract signed and willing to do it for a lot less money than he was talking about in the off season before he started putting his body at risk again every time he goes out and starts for us. And Baras came back to us looking for $21 million a year over 9 years with a player option in the ninth season. We had been at $22.5 million over 6 years with a team option in the sixth. We've kind of trended towards the middle. We're now offering him $21 million a year for only 7 years with a team option for the seventh. We are including the no trade clause that he was looking for. If that can get the deal done at these kind of dollars, I think it's still a pretty good deal for us. For some reason, I'm always spacing as far as the amount the team option needs to be. And now he's looking for more money with a player option at the end. So getting a little bit more tricky to get this done, but I would like to do that, especially at these kind of annual numbers. And Mr. Baras still wanted 9 years, said he was looking for $22.8 million. We're giving him 8 years at $21 million, but we have flipped from a team option to a player option in that final season of the contract, and still including the no trade clause. So the years are working in his favor. The options are working a little bit towards his favor, but the dollars are still strongly in our favor. And he's willing to think about it. So get him locked up for a little bit longer, a little less optionality on our side, but at the dollar prices we're dealing with for the type of pitcher he has been, and we think he likely will be, still think that this is potentially a pretty nice contract for us in Buffalo. And good news, although we are off to a slow 3-5 start, we have gotten Alexis Baras locked up to that 8-year, $168 million extension. Ended up being a compromise, as we said. It's a little bit more years than we wanted to go, certainly with the player option for the final season, and the no trade clause had to include a few options that are in Mr. Baras' favor. That said, the fact that we've got an ace pitcher locked up for 8 years at an average of only $21 million a year could end up being a nice victory for us over the course of his career in Buffalo. 38-17 with a 2.86 ERA, led the league in ERA last year, and won the first of what we hope will be multiple Cy Young awards. So feel pretty good that Baras is locked up at a pretty reasonable amount. We're still not going to have much, if any, financial flexibility to do much of anything next offseason, but getting Baras locked up now for the long term, following up the fact that this past offseason we got Deshaun Seifu locked up for the medium term, puts us in a situation where we've got more young talent on the way, and we've got some relatively young and cheap talent in our farm system, and we've got our core players that we want to be building around over the next several years and hopefully winning another World Series with locked up. Interestingly, you can see part of the reason that we're 3-5 is that Deshaun Seifu, as usual, is hitting really well with a 361 average. We don't have another player on the team who's qualified for the batting title who's hitting over a $192. So certainly a lot of struggles at the plate without Shamar Jenneret around for Buffalo in the early going. That said, 8 games into the season, it's clearly also a extremely small and almost certainly irrelevant sample size. And our pitching staff, which had been really healthy the last few seasons, suffers another pretty significant injury. Robbie McCracken, torn triceps, going to be out for 2 months. You may remember he's the Rule 5 acquisition we picked up from the Twins. 0-1 with a 318 ERA over 5 2/3 innings. Obviously, a very small sample size for him. His Sierra and his WAR not in very good territory. We will put McCracken on the IL and start looking for some help, likely in AAA right now. But this could also be the opportunity for us to try to see if we can find another left-handed pitcher. It's doubtful that there will be someone who kind of meets our standards available on the free agent market, but maybe there's somebody we can pick up in a trade for not so much. The benefit for this season is that even with Baras signed, we've got a lot of money to play with. We may end up throwing a lot of that at the draft. Probably going to boost scouting and player development a little bit while we're thinking about it, but also gives us the opportunity to eat some salary if teams are looking to dump players as the season moves along. And there wasn't really anything interesting to me on the trade market or in free agency or on the waiver wire. So we went and we promoted Mike Waters. Really didn't deserve to be cut coming out of spring training. The 25-year-old has pitched well with us in the majors over the last couple of years, but he was one of the few guys on our pitching staff who had minor league options yet, so we optioned him to Albany. He's been fine there, giving up 1 run in 3 innings pitched over 3 games, picked up a couple of saves, and now he's probably on the major league roster for at least the next month and a half because McCracken and Mosley don't expect to see either of them for almost 2 months at this point. So should be an opportunity for Waters to get some more action with the major league team and make it even harder on us to potentially send him back to Albany depending on how he performs over the next couple of months. And we've made it to May 1st. The season turned around a little bit. We've got a 12-10 record right now, so we are 4 games out, 3rd place in the NL East. If the season were to end today, we would still be half a game out of a wild card. But we've been playing better over the last couple of weeks than the relatively slow start to the season. Interestingly, with Jaheim Fagans now in the National League full-time with San Diego this year, Deshaun Seifu's streak of leading the National League in stolen bases for 9 consecutive seasons certainly seems like it could be in jeopardy. Early stages, obviously, with only 1 month into the season, but Fagans off to a very strong start in the stolen base department for the Padres. Seifu's hitting streak that he brought in from the end of last season ended up getting broken at 24. Can see our former pitcher, Drake Purvis, who was one of the cornerstones of the deal to bring Barajas over to us, is leading the National League with a 0.62 ERA. And Pierce George, who has been on the trade block from St. Louis, they're looking for a king's ransom for him, also having a big-time season for St. Louis thus far. Will be interesting to revisit whether we could pick him up at some point. St. Louis certainly doesn't look like a very good team with the exception of George. But the price that they've been looking for him is overwhelming at this point for a guy who's just a rental. And as the team has moved towards the end of May, we're still barely above 500, still in 3rd place. Let's check where we are as far as a wild card. And we're a game out of the wild card, so not too scared yet. It's early stages, relatively small sample size, but unfortunately, we just lost our closer, Pat Mems, to a serious injury, surgery to remove bone chips. His season is over. He's 32 years old in a couple of months, and he's wrecked physically, headed into an arbitration-eligible season where he's expected to make a lot of money. Did a nice job for us last year after we picked him up in the off season, and honestly he was doing a pretty good job for us this year as well, so certainly will leave a big hole in the bullpen, and will have an interesting decision given that he will be a 32-year-old wrecked physically coming off of a pretty significant surgery. Do we want to count on him for around $7.5 million to be our closer next year? So some more interesting decisions that we're going to need to be making this upcoming off season. I guess the only positive thing is that if we do move on from MEMS, that will open up a little more money for us to potentially play with. And we're going back to the future with the guy that we've brought up to replace MEMS. You may remember Adrian Morejon. He's a guy who we've had back in our minor league system the past few years. But this is a guy who had been with us several years ago in Buffalo, was a very important lefty out of our pen at times. Hasn't pitched in the majors at this point since 2034. As I mentioned, we signed him to a minor league deal early in the 2035 season, and he spent the last couple years in AAA Albany for us. Does give us another left-hander out of the bullpen for the near term. I don't necessarily think he's someone when the season is all said and done and we're hopefully headed to the playoffs that we'll want as a key left-hander out of our pen or even necessarily on our playoff roster. But for the time being, he'll be acceptable. One small piece of positive news is that our buddy Eddie Mosley just began his rehab assignment today. He's a lefty arm that will likely be replacing Morejon over the next week or two, hopefully. And we've now made it to June 1st, and our Buffalo Wings are just at 500, 25-25, 7 games behind the Phillies in the National League East. And we are now 2 games out of a wild card spot, but a few teams to jump over to get into that final wild card role. Looking at the league leaders, Seifu still would not lead the National League in steals for a 10th consecutive year if the season were to end today. And he's the only guy on our team who's on the top 3 in the key leaderboards. So time to kind of take a little bit deeper look into how this season is really going and where we've got our potential issues that we're going to need to address. Pythagorean record says we should be a little better at 27-23 in 2 games out of a wild card spot. That means we'd be in a wild card spot if we were playing up to expectations. That said, we certainly haven't been. After a winning record in May, we were 2 games below. After a winning record in April, we were 2 games below 500 in May. Only 2-6 against left-handed starters, 11-18 on the road. So the road and lefties have been our key nemesis. We also haven't done well in extra inning games. Offensively, we're still second in the National League in runs scored. So even with the departure of Shamar Jenneret, we are scoring runs. That said, we're middle of the pack in home runs, middle of the pack in batting average, middle of the pack in slugging percentage, middle of the pack in hits, middle of the pack in strikeouts. The things we do well: steal a lot of bases, walk a lot, and that ultimately has allowed us to have a pretty good on-base percentage. So the offense is good overall, you have to say, being second in runs scored, even though we're kind of top half of the league in most categories, but not dominant in some of the more prominent categories, although saying we're second in on-base percentage is a pretty important thing to be able to say. The issue is that the pitching staff is just not doing what it's expected. Starters ERA is last in the National League after we've had the top or one of the top starting rotations in baseball for the last several years. And that's really what it's all attributable to, because you can see our bullpen ERA is still third in the National League, which is kind of where we'd expect it. And honestly, the injuries that we've had have been more impactful to the bullpen than the rotation. But overall, that's led us to be 11th in runs allowed. We are middle of the pack in terms of our defensive ratings. We are the best team in the National League in terms of not walking batters. Taking a quick look at our starters, though, our top two guys, Barajas and Shazier, at least in terms of their ERAs, have done well, although Barajas is somehow 2-5, so he seems to be the guy who, when we don't score runs, ends up being on the mound. But the other three pitchers have all been very problematic, with Juan Estrada, the rookie Alexis Mendoza, and Isidro Ochoa all having ERAs in the mid-fives to closing in on a 7 in the case of Estrada. You know, looking at Estrada's profile, he still should be a useful pitcher, and I do take some comfort in the fact that his Sierra of 3.13 is kind of right where it's always been. 341 BABIP indicates he is either getting a little bit unlucky or he's just kind of lost it in terms of his stuff. Alexis Mendoza, honestly, it can kind of give a similar assessment. His Sierra is 336, but his BABIP is 359 for the rookie. Been striking out more than a batter per inning, not walking a ton of people, but he has given up some home runs. And then Isidro Ochoa, 372 BABIP. So his Sierra 431, kind of where it's been the last couple of years. Tend to think that these three guys have gotten a little bit unlucky. I mean, I guess it's conceivable that the BABIP against them remains in the 350 to 400 range over the course of the season, but haven't seen, even in the case of Ochoa and Estrada, that's been where those marks have been over the course of their careers. Looking at the bullpen, meant to mention this before when we put Mems on the IL about a week ago, but although Lorne Walborn has once again been excellent as our stopper, we like him so much in that high volume role that we actually moved Elvin Jimenez into the closer role. Yinger and Vallejo are going to be setup guys for us now. Waters and Polite in middle relief, and then Morejon and Wenzel, the lefties, in long relief and specialist type roles for us. Although we need to actually move Wenzel into a long relief role with a secondary role as a specialist. I'm just seeing here that he's only pitched an inning and 2/3, which is not an appropriate workload for 2 months into the season. So I feel like the pitching staff still has a good chance of fixing itself. Those starters, with the exception of the rookie Mendoza, are all kind of proven major leaguers and would think that they will revert back to their normal form before the end of the season. The offense, Andres Medina hitting 259, only 3 homers, but given his defense that he brings to the table, perfectly content with him performing the way that he has offensively. Walt Miller hasn't done much as our backup catcher, but he's also decent defensively. Arturo Flores hitting 286 in limited action, starting only against left-handed pitching. Joe Gallagher, the rookie, hitting just 202, but he does have 11 home runs, which is tied for the team lead with Joe Edwards. And he walks a decent amount, so his on-base percentage is close to 300. Mike Heiner hitting 253 with 7 homers. Seifu doing what he does, hitting close to 300, already has 19 doubles, 6 triples, and is one of the top base stealers in the National League with 20 at this point. Joe Edwards, as we talked about, tied with the rookie Joe Gallagher to lead the team with 11 home runs, and he walks a lot as well. Steve Anderson hitting 234, but does have 6 homers for us. Tim Hull hitting just a $196 in more of a utility role. The outfield is where we're not getting as much production as we'd like. Bobby Bolig hitting 293, 142 OPS plus. He is certainly the most productive out there. Tim Gagley has been good also with a 153 OPS plus, but only 86 at-bats. Tyreek Hardage hitting 246, only one homer. And then Dylan Carlson, who we picked up, the veteran in that trade with Boston, hitting just a $153 with 3 homers. So his 47 OPS plus is something that we would like to potentially address if we can bring on a dynamic hitting center fielder. Don't really think that there's anybody like that available quite yet, although can always try to trade for someone even if they are not on the trade block. But no real big-time offensive players available. Eric Fernandez and Ian Moeller have the most power, but Moeller is not exceptional defensively, right-handed hitter. He could certainly be an upgrade at backup catcher, at least offensively. So maybe someone to at least think about a little bit. Former player for us, Gavin Grahovac, spending the year down in AAA in the Albany organization, is on the trade block. Still is a respectable major league hitter based on what he's done the last couple years, but probably not a difference maker. And then Eric Fernandez is a guy who does have some home run pop. Another guy who has spent the year in AAA, though, thus far. 21 homers and 168 at-bats. Not necessarily the greatest influence in the clubhouse. So I don't know that there's any obvious solutions among the batters that are available. Pitchers on the trade block, as we've talked about, still headlined by Pierce George of St. Louis. Brilliant stuff, 5-4 with a 2.05 ERA. He is in the final year of that $39 million contract. He would consider a trade to our Buffalo Wings. Issue is that St. Louis is still looking for just stupid amounts of talent in return for him. And given my expectation that hopefully our pitching staff will normalize a bit in the coming weeks and months, not really ready to completely pay up for him quite yet. So I think for now, the story is we're going to continue plugging along and hope that we play above 500 ball here in the month of June as we head towards the amateur draft, but not going to do anything rash quite yet. And we won yesterday against Nashville, which was good news. Unfortunately, the Rule 5 acquisition, Robbie McCracken, had a setback in his injury from the torn triceps. Going to have surgery tomorrow. So we are going to actually put him on the 60-day IL at this point. No guarantees that he'll be back in time for the playoffs. Certainly no guarantees that he'll even be on the playoff roster when all is said and done. But taking some hits to the bullpen this year, that's for sure. But fortunately, the bullpen is probably the easiest spot on the roster to improve as we get closer to the trade deadline if we decide we're going to be looking for some help. And we've made it to the first-year player draft, June 21st, 2037. Unfortunately, Buffalo has been playing better during this month of June, although we are only 500 in our last 10. We've improved the record to 37-31, so 3.5 behind the Phillies, third place in the NL East, half a game out of a wild card spot at this point. So playing a bit better. Seifu remains the only guy on the leaderboard for us, hitting 293 with 29 steals, which is second in the National League. Taking a look at the pitching, still don't have any of our pitchers on the leaderboards, but would tend to think, and I'll check in here now with the fact that we have been playing better, would think that the statistics are looking a little better. Yeah, and our starters ERA has gotten down to 9th from 15th just over the last 3 weeks or so, so made some progress on that front. still second in the National League in scoring, and we've improved a bit to tied for 10th in runs allowed. Just modest improvement there, but good to see the starters' ERA trending in the right direction. At 37 and 31, still a win below Pythagorean expectations. So we're 12 and 6 in the month of June. Don't need to panic quite yet, but certainly going to keep an eye on things over the next 5-6+ weeks till we get to the trade deadline, because feel like this is a team where we could use a player or two to get us a jolt in terms of our performance. And as we've talked about, fortunately, even with higher scouting, development, and draft budgets, we've still got a good amount of money available. Part of the reason we boosted the draft budget is that we do have a supplemental pick in this upcoming draft this year, thanks to the departure of Jorge Carrillo, who will be picking near the end of the first round with the 35th pick. And then we are also going to have the 40th pick in the draft in the supplemental round one, the third pick of the supplemental draft for the loss of Jorge Carrillo. So we won't be picking until 35th, and then we'll be picking again at 40th. So based on feedback from viewers on how we've done previous drafts right now, I am not going to do a deep dive into all of the top prospects available here in the draft pool. I'm actually just going to get the draft started right now, and then we will highlight who's available for us to pick with our upcoming 2 picks before we finish up this episode. So although it's been interesting for me to spend some time looking at some of the top prospects and sharing that information with you, I did still look at some of the top prospects myself, but not going to bore you with the details of players that we can't pick. So we have simmed ahead to our 35th pick in the draft, and as I mentioned, we'll also be picking 40th. So we've got 2 of the next 6 picks. We'll highlight right now some of the top players who are available, at least according to our scout. Our scout sees by far the highest potential in Melosi Newman, a left fielder, 18-year-old high school player. Looks like he could have a pretty interesting bat if his contact and his home run power completely develop. Not a ton of speed, not a great defensive outfielder. Does have a high work ethic, not looking for a ton of money. Decent prospect, not the most exciting prospect in the world in my opinion. Savion Etienne, a 18-year-old left fielder also, similar-ish batting profile, also has high work ethic, not great on the base paths, not great defensively, pretty similar players. Chris Hall, another left fielder, and honestly another guy with a pretty similar profile. Could have plus contact and plus home run power like the other guys. Not looking for a ton of money. Not great defensively. Not much speed. Hall doesn't have the high work ethic that those other 2 do. I will just focus on the batters here to make this a little bit simpler. And we'll still take a look at the 3.5-star prospects. Another left fielder, Javara Ainsworth. Another guy with a similar profile to all those others. His signability is extremely hard because he's committed to University of Illinois at Springfield. But another guy potentially plus contact and plus home run power. Not much speed, and a corner outfielder. Center fielder Ken Ferrantino, 18-year-old, a little better outfield range than some of these other guys. Like the fact that he's durable, is at least competent-ish on the base paths. Not quite the same home run power as some of those other guys, but potentially better contact. Not going to strike out a ton. A little bit of gap power. Don't love any of these guys, but don't hate them either. Greg O'Shaughnessy, 18-year-old third baseman. Like the arm, like the work ethic. Another guy who's kind of a Maybe you can argue he's an above average major league bat if he completely develops with the plus home run power and the good eye. But certainly don't see a lot of future silver sluggers and all-stars among these prospects. Another third baseman, Pat Thompson, pretty well balanced hitting profile, has a little bit of speed, decent arm for a third baseman once again. David Ulerio, 18-year-old second baseman, has some personality quirks, has some defensive issues, but the bat for a middle infielder is interesting. The question is, he's probably not really a middle infielder, not really an outfielder either. Don't know if he's going to hit enough to make up for his defensive shortcomings. And then Bubba Zanto, a center field prospect, decent range, okay on the base paths, decent bunter, high work ethic, bat that looks interesting-ish if it completely develops. He's coming out of the University of Minnesota, so further along prospect than some of the others. We'll take a look also at a couple of these more developed prospects. Robbie Bailey, first baseman out of Missouri. Meh. And Tim Christ, a 19-year-old who's committed to the University of Arizona. Potentially really interesting contact, and he's not going to strike out much. Potentially decent gap power, but not really the speed to completely make use of it. Some personality quirks there. So he's a bit less interesting to us as well. Mike Marquardt, college player out of Troy. Just not that exciting to me. And last but not least, Brad Wilder, 18-year-old who's committed to Central Oklahoma. He's not a horrible prospect. I like the durability. Interesting-ish bat if it fully develops with that contact and ability to avoid strikeouts. Not much speed. Got to be honest, I don't love any of these hitting prospects. That's kind of what you expect to see around 35 and 40. But I'm hoping some of these pitchers are a little more interesting to me. Wally Shanezer looks like a reliever. He's listed as a reliever, so he's accepted the fact that he's going to be a reliever. Does look like a potential two-way player, so we'll have to see what his hitting numbers look like. Like the high adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. Like the fact that he looks like he could be a useful reliever. But unless I'm intrigued by the bat, pretty hard to justify taking him 35th overall. The bat, though, his contact, his gap power, and his avoid strikeouts all look like they could be well above average. And he's actually got some speed to take advantage of that gap power. Looks like he could be decent on the base paths. Never going to hit any home runs. The question is how many walks he's going to draw. Doesn't look like he's going to be great defensively anywhere, but with that 65 outfield range, he could certainly be a really good right fielder, left fielder, and probably a competent center fielder. So he looks probably, on a first glance, the most interesting of the guys who's available to me. Again, I don't love him as a pitching prospect, given that we know he's going to be a reliever, but a reliever / a guy who's pretty versatile and can play all over the field and might become a pretty good contact hitter with decent ability to generate some extra bases. At least somebody to consider. Starting pitcher Edgar Celerio. High work ethic. He's going to be dependent on that changeup developing to actually become a starter. Otherwise, he's a pretty generic right-handed reliever. Matt Maher, another starting pitching prospect, 18-year-old. Looks like he could have a bit above average stuff with plus movement and plus control if he fully develops. Potential 2 to 4 pitch arsenal depending on how things develop, so he could have a future as a starter. If there's any other starters who have 3-star ratings, we'll take a look at them here too. Josh Forbes is supposedly impossible to sign. A guy who's going to have a 2 to 4 pitch arsenal. Looks like he could be an above average starter if he develops, like the durability. Brad, don't call me Forrest Gump, has some personality quirks, but still looks like, again, a 2 to 4 pitch arsenal. If that change up in that curve end up developing, probably not the guy that we would go with. Chris Lott could have a 5-pitch arsenal, likely gets to 3 or 4. He's marginally interesting to me. Ramiro Medellin got 3 pitches that aren't that far off major league quality. Don't like the low work ethic and intelligence, but a guy who could be a decent major league pitcher if he develops. Joel Schultz, potential 6-pitch arsenal. So even if the slider, curve, and change, even if all 3 of those don't develop from here, still think that his fastball, his sinker, and his splitter likely let him be a useful major league pitcher. He's somewhat interesting to me. And then last 2 to look at, Dave Taylor, 18-year-old, maybe a 3-pitch arsenal. Don't love some of the personality traits with him. Probably wouldn't go there. And then Jameer Vaughn's another guy. Don't love some of the personality traits. Looks like he could have a 2 to 5 pitch arsenal. So probably could become a starter. If the movement and control develop as high as we think they would, and he develops that 5-pitch arsenal, looks like he could be an interesting pitcher. Signability allegedly impossible. He's looking for a ton of money to avoid going to Stony Brook. And with the low work ethic, loyalty, leadership, he's really good or really bad at all of the different personality traits. So an interesting prospect for Cool Breeze Vaughns. So I think there's some interesting prospects there. I'm probably leaning a little more towards the pitchers on first glance, but if you've got thoughts on what we should do in the draft, always helpful for me to hear what those of you are thinking. Take a quick look with the batters at least, just to give those of you who are still watching and still willing to share your thoughts with us couple other things to chew on in terms of power potential. Phil Crowley, a first baseman, one of the bigger potential hitters who's available. We've already talked about Ainsworth and Chris Hall on that list, Melosi Newman, a few guys who are going to struggle to make contact, Omari Bethea, contact power, Ken Ferrantino, the center fielder. I felt he was a little more interesting than some of those left fielders that we were looking at before him. So I think he's probably in the mix. Talked about Tim Christ. Savion Etienne does have a nice balance if he fully develops. So we've got some interesting decisions ahead of us with this 2037 draft. As I mentioned, we're picking 35th, and then we'll be picking again 40th. So we're going to have 2 in the next 6 picks. So we should be able to target a few people, and obviously pick whoever we want with the first one, and maybe use a little bit of strategy on someone who ends up being our second choice, pick someone who we think might fall 5 picks to allow us to get them as well. So could be an opportunity for us to make some interesting decisions at the top of our next episode. if you've got thoughts on which direction you would go, always helpful to hear those. And the team's playing a bit better of late. Hopefully, we can continue that momentum through the rest of June and then into July as we get closer to the All-Star break and the trade deadline. I do think we'll be looking to bring on some help for this team. Have had at this point some pretty serious injuries in the bullpen, so that is one obvious area that I'd like to fortify in the coming weeks. And as we talked about earlier, that's probably the easiest thing to fortify, which works in our favor. But we will be focusing primarily on the draft in our next episode, and then we'll think about the trade deadline, probably the episode after that, but certainly can make some trades in the meantime as well. So off to a decent start, not a great start here in 2037 as we try to defend our World Series title, but still have to view the episode as a success since we have Baras now locked up for 8 years at $21 million a year. And taking a look at his profile, he's also evened his record at 5-5 at this point with a 2.20 ERA. So after that rough start, at least in the one-loss column, seems to be getting a little luckier of late in terms of earning victories on the mound as the team has been playing better around him. So can't complain since we've got our ace locked up for hopefully the bulk of his career at this point. Really, with what we gave up to Miami almost 3 years ago to bring him on board, he was a guy that we needed to get locked up for the long term. And we were patient about him because we knew that we had control of him through arbitration. But now that we were potentially heading into free agency, important to not take any risk that he could leave us. So happy with the way that worked out, content with the way the season has worked out, and we'll find out how the draft goes in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.